Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and I have an interesting and somewhat different review for you here today. And that is because I reached out to John Masseria of JM Audio and asked him if he wanted me to review some of his mods. And he said, yes, that sounds awesome. So he sent me some mods of his HiFiMan HE-R9. This is called the JM OCD Extreme Stealth Edition, and it is the 7th revision, okay, of this particular mod. And he sent me two flavors, one that has this HiFiMan Sundara and Ananda style headband on it, which we'll get to that in just a moment, and then the same thing that has this HiFiMan Aria style headband on it. All right, so real quick, let's talk pricing on these. If there are 3 levels of this OCD Stealth Edition, Extreme Stealth Edition mod that you can do. And I just showed you 2 of them. The other one is just to take the stock HE-R9. This is a stock HE-R9 here. And keep the HiFiMan headband here, which JM calls the standard headband. And that is currently selling for $475 US. The upgrade to the Ananda style headband here, which JM refers to as the super headband, is currently selling for $520 US. And the Aria style, which is referred to as the enhanced Aria style headband here, is currently selling for $530 US. Now add $100 in price to all of those as the standard price, because all of those that I just mentioned, they have a line through that is $100 US more than the numbers that I just quoted. So I don't know how long these current prices will be up. If John wants to clear that up, he's welcome to comment on my video to do so. But those are the pricing for right now. Now, these are all loans, or at least these 2, I should say, are loans from JM Audio. I will be sending these off to, in some order that is yet to be determined, off to Mr. Errett and Signcraft Audio so that they can review those. And I'll also throw in the box my stock HE-R9 so that they can use those for comparisons. So I say that to tell you that I'm getting no financial gain other than normal YouTube monetization out of this video. And also John has... all he has done through some written correspondence is explain to me some of the technical things that he does with these headphones to achieve the sound that he wants. So I will give you some of that information here in just a moment. And then just rest assured that other than that, he made no attempt to influence my opinion in any way. And so all opinions that you are about to hear are mine and mine alone. So that is a little bit longer than normal introduction because we had some stuff to cover there. But let's go ahead and do shameless self-promotion, and then we will come right back and get into the review. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Please remember to hit that like button, and if you haven't, please subscribe. Also, I have a Patreon set up so that you can help support me on a monthly basis, and I've set up a PayPal donation so that you can help me out in that way too if a monthly subscription does not make sense for you. Links for all of that, including the benefits, in the description below. Please check those out. All right, on with the show. All right, so the JM Audio OCD Extreme Stealth Editions, the mods of the HiFiMan HE-R9 headphone by John Masseria here. And so again, just a real quick recap of the pricing. To do this mod with the standard stock HiFiMan headphone band is $475 US. This iteration is $520 US. This iteration is $530 US. Current pricing, those could change any moment. And again, we'll see if John jumps in and comments on the pricing here after he watches the video. All right, so what does John do with the mods here to make them mods? So there are a few things that happen here. Number one, he talks about this on his website, and I just reread the website again for about the 3rd time. So I hope that everything that I'm about to say is a fair representation of what is written there, but I will link to the website so that you can read it on your own and check my work on that too. So first thing that he does is driver matching of the HiFiMan HE-R9s. And he talks about there's a like a mounting ring around the driver that sometimes it influences the sound, and it can create some ringing up in the higher frequencies. And in the stock form, the two sides don't necessarily ring at the same frequencies. So what he does is he removes those rings, he checks the resonance of each driver, and then he matches the drivers as the first part of his mod. So you are getting more closely matched and checked matching between drivers in the mod than you are getting over the HE-R9 in the stock form. The next thing he does is he adds a lot more damping material to the cups in here. So again, this is the stock version. And what he is putting in there, he calls a multi-layer fractal mesh tech in a Fibonacci-like pattern. And so what this is he just has a, I think it's kind of a fiberglass-ish material, if I remember correctly from the website, that has different geometric patterns of openings in there. And he puts multiple layers of it on the back side of the driver. So not on the ear side, but on the opposite side, the side away from the head, to add some damping into the stock cup here, because these stock cups are not very well damped. John says there's not nothing in there, but there's not a whole lot either. And however he is loading these things in here, one, it does add a little bit of weight, as does the newer headbands, but not an insane amount. But you can just tell that there's a lot more sound damping happening. Like, we're just going to do something you do for speakers here in a second. We're going to do a knuckle wrap test, right? And I will use the microphone here that's clipped to my chest so you can hear this. I'm just going to wrap on these things real quick, one on the stock HE-R9 and then on one of the mods, so that you can hear the difference in the damping here. So here's the stock version. Me just pounding here with my knuckles on one of the cups near the microphone. Okay, here's that. Here's one of the mods, same thing. Okay, so again, stock. And I'll grab the other mod, the one with the Aria headband on it. I mean, these mods, there's definitely a much deader sound going on with that. So they are definitely damping a lot of the resonances and reflections and the back waves that come off of the driver and all of that on the inside of the cups. And like, again, that's an audible difference, not only from that test on the outside, but there are sonic differences when you play music through these as well. Okay. Another thing that John changes is the wiring scheme on these. So the stock HE-R9, which I'm basically juggling HE-R9 headphones here, but the stock HE-R9, which is what this is, remember, has the dual 3.5 millimeter inputs for the wiring, but the left side is wired up to be compatible with HiFiMan's wireless Bluetooth Blue Mini dongle, which has a 3.5 millimeter TRRS connector on it, and so that can plug in here on this side. And then there is a wire, hopefully you can see that in there. There is a wire that goes through the headband into the other cup and all of that, so that you can use a single-sided 3.5 millimeter TRRS connection on these as well. John, he changes that. Right, he fixes fixes might be the wrong word, but he rewires the mods here so that you can use basically any standard dual 3.5 millimeter headphone cable that you want. So they go from the special wiring of the HE-R9 stock form to the classic HiFiMan, like their big planars and all of that do, which is just a standard dual 3.5 millimeter input that you can use basically any aftermarket dual 3.5 millimeter cable that you want on there. Now, he doesn't provide any fancy cables. What he sends with is still the HE-R9 stock cable, which still works just fine with these headphones. But I mean, I will still encourage you to get an aftermarket cable, because this cable still introduces some extra sibilance and all of that in the sound that I don't think you want in there. So for a lot of the review, I just used my Heart HC1 cable, which is just standard dual 3.5 millimeter there. And then it has the modular system where, you know, you can use connectors of this style. And this one happens to be the 1/4 inch single-ended, but I mean, you can use 3.5 millimeter, 4-pin XLR, like basically any kind of connector here if you get Heart's adapters. So that's mostly what I did for these headphones here to test. Okay. John also goes through a quality control check where he runs test tones and all of that to make sure that, again, both drivers are balanced. And then he also uses his ears and listens to 10 tracks that he has picked out. He doesn't say which tracks on his website, though. John, you should be on my guest tracks series, actually, and name at least one of those tracks and what you used to test for, and I'll put you in my guest tracks series anyway, which I will link to down below. So that he actually gets ears on each one of these before they go out the door. So there's that nice level of personalized quality control going on there. And then he includes a 1-year warranty that handles anything other than you just being an idiot and blowing up your headphone from irresponsibility. Okay, so as long as you don't damage it through carelessness, he'll take care of you. Okay. There we go. And then he also offers that if you don't like the way that these are tuned when you get them, you can ship them back to him and he will retune them to more towards your liking. Again, you need to be able to describe what your liking is at that point. All right. So that is a lot of what John has talked to me, and as he was writing to me some of the things that he was doing, I could tell he's very proud of his work, and honestly, I think that he should be, and I would be proud too if I put this much work into a product and got the kind of result here that I'm going to talk about in just a moment. Okay, let's see, is there anything else that we need to talk about, build or features or anything like that? Probably just need to go back and hit the highlights of what the stock HE-R9 is, because these are HiFiMan HE-R9s that have a different headband and more driver damping material and then have been driver matched. Okay, so these are low impedance dynamic driver headphones. They, I don't know exactly what the impedance and all of that is on the mods, but since they are built on the same driver, whatever the specs are from the stock HE-R9, I think are going to be at least close to what the mods are. And I can tell you that by ear, the drivability of the mods is almost exactly like the stock R9. Like there was very, very little changing of potentiometer positions when I started doing A/B tests from the stock to the mods and all of that. So, I mean, the drivability, very, very similar. So other than losing the ability to use the blue mini dongle on these, basically any other way that you try to amp these, you're going to get pretty similar results to the stock R9, provided you're using the correct cables on the stock R9. All right, so there is that. Okay, so let me label my test gear, or give you a list of the gear that I use to test, and then we will jump into the sound results on these things. All right, so for the most part, I used a what is it called? Why am I drawing a blank on this? The HiFi RS6 digital audio player DAP, which I reviewed recently and we'll put a link to down below. Spent a fair amount of time driving these, and that handled them well. I also tried, I think it got the most time at my desk from the Shit Bifrost 2/64 into the Lake People G111 Mark II amplifier. And I also used that setup, or I would use my Berkeley Alpha Series 2 DAC, which I realize is way up there in price comparating, but like that tells me how well these things scale up, into the same Lake People amp to do the AB comparisons, because those Lake Peoples have dual 1/4 inch headphone outputs. And so using two of the Heart RC1 cables or HC1 cables with 2 1/4 inch adapters, I can just plug two of these into that Lake People at the same time and just literally just switch back and forth and really not even have to touch the volume knob. So that was cool, and I used that a lot to drive these as well. Were there other things in here? Yes, pretty sure I briefly ran them off of my Vioelectric HPA V281 from the Berkeley, just to get an idea of how well they scale up and all of that. But Most of the critical listening was done using the Lake People G111 Mark II amp for convenience reasons, and then also I think it's kind of at a price where it made sense to stay and test these out. Okay, now from a marketing standpoint, and we're getting into the sound here. From a marketing standpoint, there are some user reviews and all that on the JM website where it says that, hey, these mods sound like they are like $1,500 headphones. And so, I mean, that gets my attention when I see something like that. I'm like, okay, is that really true? Because when we're talking about a $500-ish product, $500 to $600, I get pretty skeptical when people are saying, hey, it's like a $1,500 set, especially when they're closed back, because closed backs are hard to do, okay? And so that was kind of going through my mind there as I listened to these. So did it hit that? I mean, we'll come back to that in just a moment. Now, the basic sound signature here, and I'll just put one on my head and listen to my muffled voice, which, by the way, is a good way to talk about the isolation. They isolate slightly better than the stock HE-R9 does because of the increased damping material in there, but just the basic design of the R9, which, you know, carries over into these mods, is there's a slight gap between the cup and the rest of the headphone material in here, and all of that. So, and then like the pads are not super well sealing. So there's not a ton of isolation. I had an SPL meter on my cell phone out here with music playing at my reference about 72, 73 decibel average level, and holding it, you know, about out here to see how much the sound leaked. Like these leaked about 2 decibels average, less than the stock R9 did as far as leak goes. And like there's a little bit more muffling of ambient sounds, but again, these are not, just by design, they're not super isolating kinds of things. So just keep that in mind. If you need like a cubicle kind of closed back headphone, this may not be isolating enough for that use case depending on your situation. Okay, sound signature. Let's come back to that. The stock R9 is very, very bass and mid-range forward. So they're very fun and hard-hitting in the low end. The mid-range is pushed forward a little bit, which can give them some kind of shouty and honky, but it pushes the vocals forward a little bit. And so they are a bass and vocal focused kind of headphone with a little bit wonky timbre because of that mid-forwardness. What the mods do is they are still quite bassy, but not quite as extreme as the stock form is. So I would describe these as a very like mild V, but might be more accurately described as a bit of a U shape, where the really deep sub bass is elevated just a little bit, and then there's just a hint of elevation up in the air frequencies way up high in the treble. Okay. So that, and the mid-range in particular is pulled much back more in line towards neutral, and it gets rid of like the 1 kilohertz peak that is in the stock form, so that the tonal balance through the mid sounds a lot more natural and a lot more even in the mods than it does on the stock. Okay, so I think right off the bat, the tonality is an improvement over the stock form. Okay, so that is good. Now, there are other improvements as well, because when we get into some of the other technicalities in the performance beyond just the frequency response, like these are a significant upgrade sonically over the stock R9. So kudos to John for pulling that off, because these definitely are a big step forward in performance over the stock form. How so? Let's unpack that a little bit more beyond just those frequency response differences that I just mentioned there. The thing that stands out to me is, like, even though the stock form were not super airy or didn't have a ton of treble, they could still have a little bit of sibilance in there at times. And the sibilance on these comes down to a level where it's not never, but I would say it gets quite rare and only shows up on recordings that are not the best in the treble. So it doesn't really add a ton of sibilance. So that is definitely an improvement over the stock form. The next thing that jumps out at me is the spatial performance, the staging and all of that. You get a fairly wide and big soundstage for being a closed back, but then the imaging and the separation in there are much, much improved over the stock form. So when you listen to like orchestral performances and those kinds of things, which I think are kind of the acid test for spatial performance, like a big, 70-piece symphony or whatever that's in this U shape with layers of the depth in front of you, okay, like that kind of thing, like all of that sounded more convincing to me with each instrument put in a more proper space with space around it, more so on the mods than the stock. The stock kind of blends it all together and does an okay job with imaging, like the positive side of where is it, but doesn't do so hot on the separation, like the negative part of the spatial, just in terms of like where is sound not, okay? The mods do a much better job, a much improved job of those aspects over the stock iteration. So that is another dramatic improvement there. And then because of that, that better tonal balance through the mid-range in the mods over the stock that I mentioned too, the timbre gets a lot better, where to a significant degree, just things sound more like their real life things. Voices sound more like voices. Pianos sound more like pianos. Guitars sound more like guitars. On and so forth, like on that sort of thing. So the timbre is also greatly improved. Okay, and these are not necessarily subtle changes. I mean, these like really just jump out as, hey, we're different for the better when you start A-Bing these two. Now, there is not quite as much mid-bass presence on the mods as there is in the stock. So that can come across at times as the stock R9 having a little bit more physical impact, a little bit more slam, a little bit more punch, that sort of thing. I'm not sure if that's actually true or if it just is more of a psychoacoustic thing because of the slightly bloated mid-bass in the stock form that has been chilled out in the mods. But the mods still dig pretty deep and hit pretty hard in the sub-bass. Like they are still a fun, punchy, very present. I think a lot of bass heads will like what's going on with the bass presentation in the mods. Right, so that I think is also a strength. Now the resolution here is better than the stock form, but I would not call these resolution monsters. Now some of the aspects that I just described, like having an improved spatial presentation, particularly when you talk about imaging and separation, okay, and depth layering and that sort of thing, and having better timbre, like those two traits are not entirely disconnected from resolution. And the mods do a little bit better job of things like bass texture and picking out subtleties like the resinous sound, like the zizzy sound of a bow being dragged across a string. When we're talking about those orchestral performances and all of that, then the stock does. It does a better job of capturing things like room reverbs that are in a lot of rock and roll, particularly classic rock tracks. Like you can hear the instruments and all of that, and then you can hear like reflections off the walls of the studios. Sometimes if you really know what you're doing, you can hear like the drums bleeding into however they mic'd the keys or the organ or whatever and all of that. It's like you can hear that come through more so on the mods than on the stock form. But I think probably because of the driver construction in the R9, like you're not, it's not a resolution monster. It's not pulling out every last detail, even though the detail retrieval is definitely also an improvement over the stock form. Okay, so in just about every way that really truly matters, in my opinion, other than to a small minority, those who only care about the amount of bass quantity and impact, I think that the technical improvement sonically of the mods over the stock HE-R9 is quite significant and quite impressive. So a round of applause from me to John on that one for figuring out how to mod these in the way that he did and get that result. Now, I also think, let's come back to physical comfort for a moment, because I think this style headband is probably the most comfortable, but this is not, that's weird, this happens, okay? But this one is not far behind. I think it's going to be, especially since they're only about $10 different in pricing right now, it's going to be a lot of preference between this headband and this headband here. I think the Aria one might clamp just a slight bit harder than this one does, and I thought that might have an impact of sound, so I did A/B these to see if the clamp strength on the Aria style, was decreasing the driver to ear distance just enough that we were getting some sonic changes, and maybe not enough that I am confident saying that for sure it is there. I thought there may have been just a little bit more clarity here than here, but not a ton of, not any big noticeable frequency response changes or anything like that. So I think it's just going to come down to style and comfort for you in terms of which headband you go with, because even with the slightly, I think this one, just on my head, it feels like this one clamps just a little bit harder. Just a little bit. I didn't notice any sonic differences because of that either. Okay, so those are things to keep in mind there. Let's go ahead and jump into some other comparisons, because we'll circle back to that question of, can these mods, and I've already compared to the stock R9 here, and so that one I just need to get out of the way for a moment. Can these mods punch up into that $1,500-ish tier like some of the comments on the website say? So I tried to compare these mods to HiFiMan's HE-R9 dynamic version and the Focal Radiance, which are both $1,300 closed backs right now. The Radiance, Focal is making another run of, and so that should be out soon-ish. I think it's headphones.com is taking pre-orders, or at least was on that. Might be something to check out. And the R10D is still floating around out there. I think that these mods here, the HE-R9 mods, overall perform a little bit better than the R10D. In my review of the R10D, I said this one is about $400 or $500 overpriced. I don't think it's a $1,300 headphone. I think it's more of an $800 to $900 headphone. Okay, so even so, these at a worst case scenario of $630, I think are just subtly slightly more detailed with a little bit more texturing and just, subtle micro detail resolution. And still a more coherent spatial presentation and tighter, more controlled bass than the R10D can do, okay, at $630. Now, John will also mod these and has offered to do that to this pair, which I may take him up on. We'll see if I can get around to that, all that to see what happens to those. But I think these do outperform the R10D just by a hair, honestly, which for the pricing is fairly impressive. So, do these perform on the $1,500-ish tier, at least from this point, at this comparison point? Yeah, probably, but I don't think that's quite fair because these are overpriced in my opinion. What about the Radiance? I had to listen pretty carefully, but in time I did notice that particularly with the spatial stuff, the Radiance is higher performing than the JM mods. And to me, that came out in two areas. The timbre here is still more lush and natural to me than on these. There's just a slight bit of extra resolution here, and it comes out particularly in bass texturing. Like you can hear the finger action on electric bass guitars a little bit more clearly on the Radiance than you can from the JM mods. And then the biggest difference, though, I think, is in the spatial presentation, particularly in the depth dimension. These are not quite wall of sound. There is some depth to them, but the ability of the Radiance to portray depth in this dimension really stands out as being superior there. And it just overall has a more coherent, natural, believable spatial presentation to my ear than the mods do. Okay. The other thing about the Radiance is these are well isolating. So beyond the sonic performance aspects here, These isolate ambient sounds better than the mods do, and they also hold sound in and leak sound out less than the mods do. So these would be a better option, again, if you were like in a office cubicle setting and you needed a closed back that was not going to disturb the person on the other side of the cubicle wall from you or whatever. Like, these are a better option ergonomically from that standpoint. And then again, like, they're also, 32 ohm, 100-ish decibel sensitivity headphones, and easy to drive on just about any kind of mobile amp like these are also. So from that data point, no, I don't think these are quite up there on that, $1,300, $1,400, $1,500 tier. I don't think these are going to catch what the Audeze LCD-XC closed is capable of, at least the 2021 edition, which I have a review of and I'll link to below. When you properly EQ that Audeze LCD-XC closed, its stock tuning is a bit of a mess in my opinion, but you EQ that out, and the performance ceiling on that one is also higher than these, okay, on that. So there are some comparisons there as well. However, when we come back and we talk about just these JM OCD Extreme Stealth Edition, did I say that in the right order? Extreme Stealth Edition, I did, yes. When we talk about just these and the value that they offer, worst case scenario, with this style headband, they're costing you $630, and I think you're getting a fairly good deal for that, because I do think that they perform at a level that is commensurate with a couple $100 more of cost than that. Okay, so I don't know what else to say other than that, other than, yeah, really strong mod here. They are reasonably comfortable. They are easy to drive. They have a fun but still fairly accurate sound signature, where just the slight bit of emphasis, really deep and really high, add the fun, but through the middle they are more neutrally tuned and gives a fairly accurate tonal balance and timbre through there. And then the spatial performance, especially over the stock HE-R9, is a vast improvement and all of that. So overall, well done. And yeah, I think I can recommend these fairly comfortably for anyone who might be interested in them out there. So I will go ahead and leave it there. Thanks to John Masseria again for loaning these to me. I will get them out to one of Signcraft or Mr. Errett, whichever one of them tells me they are ready for these first, along with the stock R9, so they can compare those. If you have not checked out my Patreon, please do that. Link in the description. If you can't do a monthly subscription but can make a one-time donation, please check out my PayPal. Link in the description. And yeah, I'm Wave Theory. This has been my review of the JM Audio OCD Extreme Stealth Edition, the mods to the HiFiMan HE-R9. These are the 7th revision. Thanks for watching, and as always, enjoy the music.